But anywho, so I run this software tool. We help managers become better. And as I was saying, if you are a new manager, usually you go to a lot of different other places to try to become better. And what we found is that none of those things really work. And oftentimes they're really expensive, because what is so difficult about leadership is that you're bridging essentially theory with practice. When someone comes to you and says, I want to raise, that's not something you can necessarily look up in a book. And so what we did is we spent the past more than 6 years doing research across thousands and thousands of managers, and essentially trying to figure out and boil down what is the main pieces that make a leader successful. So we identified what those things are. It's trust, honesty, and context. And I'm happy to talk about how we developed that methodology and everything. But what we decided to do is actually to build a tool that helps leaders actually put that into practice, as well as put together a knowledge center for people to actually learn how to do that from the get-go. So we give you tools for running one-on-one meetings, for getting feedback, for building trust in your team. And then to have the foundational knowledge, you can always you can go to our workshop live sessions, and then we have a community of over 1,000 managers from all over the world. So that's what I do. A little bit of background about myself, or actually maybe a few other things that you should know that might be pertinent as you think about, what things you might want to ask me based off my experience. So we work with thousands and thousands of managers all over the world. And we've been in business for the past now 6 years. And we had a really unconventional start as a company. So previously I had a terrible boss. Don't know if anybody can relate, terrible boss. And it was so frustrating to me at the time that I decided I want to start a company to solve this. Had no idea what it was going to be, but I ended up starting a executive coaching and organizational consulting firm to begin with. So that's what was almost 10 years ago. And one of my very first actually consulting clients was a company called Basecamp, which you may be familiar with. So if you're not, Basecamp, they make project management for millions and millions of people all over the world, or project management software. And they were my first consulting client. So I did a project for them that was extremely useful, actually, around helping their CEOs become better as leaders. And what was fascinating is they actually were building their own internal prototype to help them as leaders get feedback. And the prototype ended up doing so well, and they started selling it, and people were really excited about it, that they turned to me, the founder, Claire, we don't know what to do with this prototype. We feel like it could be its own company. So we have this crazy idea. We've never done it before. What if we spun out this prototype to be its own separate company and you run it? And at the time, that was called Know Your Company. Today, we're called Know Your Team. And so happy to talk through the evolution of the product and all of that. But what happened is I got this company. It was just me, no engineers. I know how to code, but not in terms of the level of what this product required. It was like, okay, Claire, here you go. Now go run this company. And so we bootstrapped to profitability within that first month. And since then have been working with, over 15,000 people all over the world. We have managers, everyone from managers at Airbnb and Evernote and Kickstarter, to folks who work in government, to teachers, managers all over the world in over 25 different countries. And so, happy to share any and all about that experience. But how about that for an introduction?
For our first question, does anyone want to start?
I could go.
Mishka, go ahead.
I'm great. Okay. Thank you, Claire, for doing this. I'm really inspired by your journey, and I love that you've got an emphasis on happiness. In all your writing and your product. I just love that happiness is like your core value. So my question to you is that on this journey, as you're developing this product and growth and product market fit, was there ever a point where you were really stuck and you just felt was there a point where you just really, really like, I'm just stuck? And how did you get over that?
Honestly, last week, quite frankly. I know that sounds ridiculous. All the time. And I don't say that as I think sort of the mythology of entrepreneurship is very self-flagellating. It's like, oh my God, this is so hard. And oh, I want to quit. And it's so I don't want to sort of play into that. But I will say it's hard all the time. I will say one of the biggest sort of decision points that we came to where it was like, what are we doing? and is this going to really work was about 2 years ago. So previously, our company had been called Know Your Company, as I was saying. That was when it was originally spun off by Basecamp. And it was actually a pretty different product than what it is today. So it was actually originally a software tool that was specifically for CEOs of small to medium-sized businesses. So today we serve managers, right, of any size company. So different in audience, and then also very different in terms of value proposition and feature set, in the sense that we were really focused on helping CEOs get feedback. And that was it. So it wasn't really about leadership and management as much as it was about feedback, which we felt like was a core part of it, but it was very narrow. And we'd been doing really, really well. Like I mentioned, we'd never raised any money. We had a lot of happy customers. I've always wanted to keep the team really small. Everything seemed like this is the dream. This is what I've been wanting to do. We're delivering value to our customers. Great. Except there was one sort of foreboding issue, which is I noticed after a lot of really steady growth that we started to become really flat. And that wouldn't be such a problem, just in the same sense of whenever you start to see something level off, you never know if you really zoom out, if that's just sort of a small piece of the greater gradation. But what was disconcerting to me is we were flat in terms of sales, and our traffic, so our organic traffic that we're getting to our website, was enormously increasing. Like in a span of less than 12 months, we'd increased our organic traffic by more than 21x, like insane traffic. And when I mean traffic, I mean actually traffic to our blog. So the way people find out about Know Your Team is we don't do ads or anything like that. I just write, and it's just me. And on our blog, we have hundreds and thousands of people reading things off our blog. And so I was like, what is going on? People are reading our stuff and then coming to our website and then not buying. What's happening? And it was really confusing. It was really demoralizing, because it was like, if our product continues to go flat and our traffic continues to go, like, we have a complete mismatch. Like, what are we going to do about this? So we started doing a bunch of research into obviously who's actually coming to our blog. And what we realized is that what I had been writing more recently that was accounting for the increase in traffic was posts not for CEOs, but posts for managers. And it was all about leadership, and it was all about helping new managers, right? So we were noticing that we ran a few other experiments that we felt like validated that's who our audience was. And so we realized we had almost the opposite problem that most startups have. And maybe for you, all as pioneers, maybe the opposite problem of what you have, or maybe you have my problem right now. We'll find out. But what the problem was, is we had an audience, but we didn't have a product. And what most people face is they don't have a product, or they have a product, but they don't have the audience yet, right? So it was like, what are we going to do? So we decided, well, let's rebuild the product. Let's change the product to fit the audience. And so that was a huge moment of like, oh my God, do I just like, with this company, it's going to die over time. Like, that's essentially like that flatness. Like, that's what's going to, like, you model it out, and that's what's going to happen if we don't do something different. And so it was a hard decision to make. And so what we did is we spent a year rebuilding the product. Keep in mind, we're a tiny company. We're a 2-person company. We're serving, like I was saying, thousands and thousands of people all over the world. We have no idea if we launch this new product, which we rebranded to Know Your Team. We changed the pricing model, changed a bunch of the features. We have no idea when we flip the switch if anyone's going to buy it. And so essentially it's like, we're going to change it, and then we're just going to see, like, how do you, and we ran a few intermediary tests between that, but it was kind of, it was a bit of rolling the dice in that case. And luckily, it's been about a year since then, and things have worked out okay. But it was, looking back, I definitely felt like, oh, this could make or break us. Thanks for that question.
Thank you. It was really insightful.
Our next question is from Andre. Go ahead. You can ask the question yourself.
Okay, cool. Hello, Lew. Nice to meet you in person. I've been reading your blog for quite a while, to be honest, and starting as the manager. You indeed helped me a lot. I have a question. I noticed recently Know Your Team changed the pricing package from higher to the lower one. I was curious how did you make this decision and why? And how did it impact your traction, your growth, revenue? And also, what did you do with other customers that subscribed before for the higher price?
Yes. Thank you so much for that question. And thanks so much for reading our blog. I always love hearing that. Yeah, so previously, the way that we priced Know Your Team, it was $65 per month or $600 per year per manager. And that's pretty much how we've priced everything, for the past year. And we priced it at that sort of price point. I mean, pricing is such a weird, dark, honestly, it's like a black box. There's a lot of rigor around thinking you know what the right pricing is, but really you're just kind of like throwing a dart at a dartboard and being like, all right, well, like I think this value makes sense and I think this strategy makes sense. But for us, that just felt right. We wanted to keep it accessible. We wanted it to be something that you feel like you could swipe your credit card and not have to ask your senior manager to sign off on it. And so we were like, okay, let's go with 65. We noticed a few things though. We noticed that and I do a ton of customer calls and, also, I do some customer support too. I just think it's really important to be always close to that. And we were noticing that people would say, oh God, I really love Know Your Team, but it just feels a little expensive. But what we realized is that actually most people were putting it on their personal card. They didn't even want to have to ask their manager. It was sort of the feeling of, no, I'm doing this for my own personal development. And some of the companies are so small, right? They're like 20 people, 40 people, that they don't have sort of a personal development budget, right? And so we were thinking, oh, interesting, that would make sense. Because for me, like as Claire, I'm like, what apps do I pay $65 a month for me personally, right? Like, I don't know, like not a ton, if it, right? And so we're like, okay, I guess that I understand why that would feel like a point of tension for people. So we're like, okay, we're watching that. And then another thing that we were looking at was just our conversion. So both our growth and signups and our conversion from that. And as I mentioned, and you're sort of evidence of this, of like people reading our blog, those are the ones who are signing up and then converting. But the conversion rate that we found, we did a lot of different experiments of like different ways to increase that. We felt like still for someone who's reading content just feels a little low. It should actually be around 12% in terms of the number of signups that you have actually converting into sales. And I think ours at the time was closer maybe to 10, sometimes 9, which isn't terrible, but it was just kind of like that's interesting. And so, I started thinking about, well, I wonder what effect that price would have on both the number of signups and what that conversion rate is. So we decided to run an experiment in January. We made 0 announcements about it, made 0 noise about it. For 1 week, we decided to cut the price by more than half and just figure out what happened. Oh, actually, you know what I should share? Let me share one other thing, which is we also ran an experiment around this because I was just so curious about what price sensitivity was, where in November, we ran an experiment for a week where we actually increased the price to $99 per month per manager. Again, just to understand what is price sensitivity here, right? We're like, what is it that is holding, people back? And that was actually disastrous. Quite frankly, it was like, oh my God, this is really going to hurt us if, we got to turn this on. This is like, this is a huge mistake. So we ran that and we were like, okay, we shouldn't do higher. Yes, please.
Did you increase it for the whole platform or just for some subset of users?
Just for new users who were coming through for that first week. Mm-hmm. And the intention and idea was, okay, after we've collected all the data and analyzed it, we would go back to them and then even it out again, right? So give them credit or refund them for whatever the extra price was, right? We weren't trying to like get anyone, if that makes sense. It was just, okay, let's run the experiment for a week, be really quiet about it, and just see what we learn. And so we learned, oh my God, those kill our numbers in terms of, reducing signups by like 30 or 40%. Conversion rate was cut more than in half. It was terrible. It was almost like a panic mode of, oh my God, change it back. This is a terrible idea. And sometimes you have to do that, right? In order to learn what doesn't work. And so then we thought, okay, let's go in the opposite direction because clearly folks are really price sensitive on the higher end. And so we went with this idea of, well, let's run an experiment where just for a week, we'll do $30 per manager per month. Again, don't do a big promotion about it. Just apply it for new signups who are coming. And we saw signups increase by 60 to 70% and conversion more than that as well, more than actually 100% increase in conversion. It was crazy. Yeah, it was insane. So our conversion is, yeah, so we, yeah, oh, sorry, let me back up. And so the way that we sort of evaluated whether or not this was actually something that would be worthwhile is we waited for, we ran it for a week, and then we looked at what those numbers were and then compared it to sort of an average cohort of signups and sales earlier in the year. And then looked at, okay, well, how many signups happened? What's that conversion? And then also what's the churn, right? Because hypothetically, if someone's paying less for your product, over time, they're not going to be as likely to stop using it, right? And so the hypothesis it will also improve churn. Now, to make a real true call on that, we would have had to wait a really long time. And so what we noticed is, okay, the number and the differential on signups and sales is so significant, it makes sense to roll this out for everyone. If, and here's the important part, as a small company, if we can afford it. So after seeing that this would be really helpful for sales and signups, then the question becomes, well, what about for existing customers, right? That's what you were asking, Andre. So, I ran a bunch of numbers looking at, well, could we change it can we afford to change this for everyone going forward? Yes, we could do that, right? It'll cut our MRR going forward in half, essentially, like it'll hurt us. But if we bank on getting that number of signups and converting, it would probably take us 3 to 4 months to make that up, which is fine. Because essentially what I want to do and what's important to me is fairness and happiness, essentially, right? So I want people to feel like this is fair. But then the question becomes, well, what about people who recently bought the product? That doesn't feel very fair. Like if I just bought the product like yesterday at 65 and then you change it to 30, that's kind of a bummer. So we looked at everybody who purchased in the last 2 weeks, and then we refunded or gave them credits for that amount of time. And then we also looked at the folks who purchased at 99 and made sure that they were comped as well. And so it was sort of a balance of like, what can we tactically afford as a very, small, non-venture backed company at the same time while being as fair as possible to our customers.
I see. Got it.
Awesome.
One more follow-up question. Thank you for sharing such details. But so you refunded for the part of the users that sign up in the recent few weeks, and all the users that sign up before, they remain on the previous plan. And did any of them wrote to you anything or complain?
Well, so they wouldn't be on actually the previous plan. They all got moved to 30. So everybody got moved to the cheaper plan. What it was is, if you have previously paid on the old plan, we weren't going to refund you or recoup you for that amount, if that made sense. Because we ran the numbers on that, and it just, for us, it would kill us, quite frankly. Like we'd be out. So we just tactically couldn't do it. But then also from a philosophical standpoint, that's value that they collected on at an expectation that was the price, right? And that it's, we want them to benefit from the fact we're making it more accessible going forward, if that makes sense. I'll share one other thing, which I think is actually really important as all of you think about pricing products, and especially with existing customers, it is extremely important to be as thoughtful as possible around it. Because Andre, to your point, you're like, did you get any people asking for refunds or anything? So from our thousands of folks who are using our product, I had one person who was like, hey, so could I actually get a refund? Like they were just outside that 14-day mark, one person out of everyone else. And I think what that really sort of calls out to is just the importance of how you message and how you talk about why you're making the change. So for example, when I sent out the message, I didn't say, hey, we're cutting the price of Know Your Team in half and now we're cheaper for everybody. That's not the angle I took. What I did is I said, hey, what's really important to us at Know Your Team is keeping the product as accessible as possible. And we got a ton of feedback about, or because of that, so we've been getting a lot of feedback, trying to figure out how to make the product as accessible as possible. And as a result, we decided to reduce price. This is how it affects you. You get to benefit from it going forward. And we hope that we can, stay, just do everything we can to stay committed to this. We also emphasize the fact of how different this makes us than our competitors. So for example, other software tools that you might use for one-on-one meetings or for getting feedback, they often are focused on much bigger companies. So they'll do annual pricing, they'll force the contract. It's like a minimum of $2,500 to sign up. You have to talk to a salesperson to do it. You don't get a free trial. They walk you through a demo. Just honestly kind of a lot of bullshit if you're just a manager who you're just like, I just want to like run good one-on-one meetings. Can I just use it and just pay you a little bit? And so we're like, if you're a manager in a small to medium-sized business, this is for you. And we're not like everybody else.
I see. Got it. Thank you so much for sharing.
You bet. Thanks for the question.
Sweet. Next up, we have Aditya. And Aditya, please also introduce yourself, maybe where you are and a quick, just one-liner on your project.
Thanks, Rishi.
I'm Andrew from Kiev, Ukraine. We are actually building a bit similar software, performance management for small and medium teams. We started a little bit from a different approach, from goals, also added feedback, praises, and performance reviews, and also trying to enter the market of the smaller companies. And me personally also don't like this enterprise approach of more the software sales annual contracts. And we already have some clients switching from these bigger players to our solution.
Awesome. Well, I think there should be more solutions around it. I think small businesses and small business owners and managers in small to medium-sized businesses should have more options. So I think that's awesome.
Cool.
Adi, go ahead.
Hey. Hi, Claire.
Hi.
This is my name is Aditya. We are based out of India right now. We are also in somewhere in the performance management space. We haven't launched yet. We are still thinking about what it should be. We do know that we want to build something for remote managers. It might sound cliched, but I have been following Know Your Team since I think the Know Your Company days. I've been in HR tech for almost 4 to 5 years now. And while my peers used to follow Lattice or Culture Amp, I always used to tell them, F that, just read these blogs. So some of the stuff that you guys have been up to has been really helpful. I have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to put them out there. In case we have time, we can just skip over and come back to them. I think the first one is that I have seen pulse surveys, which are a bunch of 60 questions that will go to 10,000 people in one large enterprise company in one go. The employee has to sit down and fill all those 60 questions in one go once a quarter. The fill rates are horrible, right? People just leave it. So I'm wondering, what are the fill rates for the weekly check-in kind of questions that the approach that many companies have, and I know that your team also has that. So how many questions go out and how many times do they get filled? I would love to know that. The second one would be, out of all the tools that you have for managers, right? One-on-one documentation, how to run meetings, the community, the guides. I think you do workshops also now. Do you feel there's this one pull from the market that people are really signing up for? Like, is there a hook and the others are good to have, if you feel so? So that's my second question. The third one is, I don't think we'll have time for it. Maybe someone else can ask a similar question. What would be a big pro and a con of raising money from indie VC? Since you have raised, what has changed? What's been good? What's been bad? What's been an area of improvement? These are my questions.
Aditya, thank you so much.
I say go for all three.
I was just about to say, we got time. I wrote them down. We'll go, okay. And we'll just go in order. So response rates are a really interesting thing. The way that we send our pulse survey questions through Know Your Team is we actually send one question at a time. So with the exception of, we have a feature in the beginning when you first use Know Your Team, it's called the icebreaker, and we have 5 to 6 questions on that. And here's the thing, response rates vary from question to question. They also actually vary based on team size. And the last caveat that I'll mention, and then I'll tell you what the actual numbers are. The last caveat that I mention is that we really think of Know Your Team not as just a piece of software that you're using to get engagement, but rather how is it an actual real tool for behavior change? And if that's true, then a huge important integral part of successful behavior change is that the adoption of the thing and the participation with the tool actually has to be intrinsic, which means that anytime that people feel forced to participate, which is not what I'm saying you're implying that at all, but anytime people feel forced or obligated to participate actually detracts from the possibility that it might actually positively influence the behavior change you're looking for, which means that a high response rate doesn't necessarily correlate with the outcome that you want to see. Actually, seeing more people respond to the tool doesn't mean that people are more excited or more engaged. They could actually just feel more pressured, right? So in fact, it's not the best leading indicator for us of how well people are using the tool for successful behavior change, right? So that's just like one thing to think about. That being said, we pay attention to the response rates, of course, because of course you don't want anybody, like you don't want zero all the time, but they vary question by question. So our icebreaker on average sees 95% completion, which is actually pretty crazy. Most companies, when they send it out, every single person answers it and all of the questions. And I think it says something about what people are looking for, which is when you take a little bit of time to ask them about themselves and to share it, that people get really excited about that. Likely the lowest response rates that we see are around something called our culture question, which is what you would sort of associate with a typical employee engagement pulse survey, which depending on the team size is anywhere from 20 to 30% on average. So these are questions like, for example, have we been all talk and no action on anything lately? Or is there anyone in the company who you've seen do good work that's gone unnoticed? So it depends. And you have to keep in mind that our average team size of people who are using this are like 7 or 10 people. So if someone's sick and a few other people forgot to fill it out, then you might see, that percentage a lot lower than say if you're deploying this in, and this is true, we have teams of 50, 100, even 500 using it, right? So that's just something to consider with the average of what that gets plotted out to be. We have a few other survey questions or pulse questions. One is called a heartbeat check-in, which is all about helping everybody know, what everyone is working on. And that likely, it also depends on the company. So for example, we use that internally at Know Your Team. We all fill that out every single day. Like we would have it 100%, right? And then you have other teams where that's not the case, but I would say on average, we see around half the team usually filling that out on average, right? And then I would say the most popular question other than the icebreaker is something called the social question, which are all about people sharing fun things about themselves. And again, depending on the team, it's anywhere between 30, 40 to 50% of the team filling it out on a regular basis. Again, big caveat being, does that response rate actually correlate with true meaningful engagement that is creating positive behavior change? That's the thing to sort of really think about. And then we tell, and this might be something, to think about for your product, Aditya, we tell our customers, don't get hung up on the response rates. Like as leaders, it's actually almost addicted, or we become addicted to sort of watching that graph go up. So as a result, we don't show response rates actually even in the software other than in the individual questions. Like we don't give you this big graph where you can chart over time. It makes this very different than other tools. We're just going for something else. So there's a deeper question of what are you trying, like what's the purpose of the response rate, right? What is that trying to indicate? So that's that. The second question that you asked.
Sorry. So what should I be hung up on? If not the response rate, what's a good leading indicator of saying that, hey, someone's adopting this, real change is happening, the team is becoming better, the manager is becoming a good leader?
Absolutely. So here's and this is what actually I think makes our product really hard, and what we struggle with is because the leading indicator is really hard, which is essentially it's a manager learning something new and then doing something different as a result. And how do you really track that in the software? We get it anecdotally. It's why we're bullish on talking to customers all the time. But that's one leading indicator. Are they learning something new that they didn't before? Are employees learning something new that they didn't before?
Got it.
So it's a big challenge that we face, quite frankly. It's like, the leading indicator, it's hard to say what that is. Your second question about sort of what have we seen in terms of like a pull from the market in terms of what people have been really gravitating to. It's really interesting. I think the easiest way to find this is we use a tool called SEMrush, which essentially looks at sort of what the most commonly searched terms are, for your industry, et cetera. And there's always sort of a flavor of the day in terms of what people are looking for. So right now, one-on-one meetings is really big. Yeah. So we get a lot of people coming to us for one-on-one meetings. It's something that employee engagement surveys, obviously, that's something people are coming for. So my sort of advice would be, depending on sort of where you're positioning yourself in the market and what sort of feature set you're looking at, is just really, it's quite obvious, but just really looking at the data of what people are searching for is what we use. And then last thing is, indie VC. So as I mentioned, for the first 5 years of the company, we didn't raise any money at all. Completely bootstrapped, profitable since month one, every year since then. And then when we decided, as I was explaining earlier, we were sort of in this big crisis of, oh my God, should we rebuild the entire product? Oh my God, like shit. What does this mean? I wanted to really, during that process, I wanted to, one, be able to mitigate risk, because if we were going to launch a new product, and who knows how long it would take us to get sales in the door right away, is to have a cushion in the bank, so to speak. And then the other thought was, we will really need some help to improve the product after it launches, because we had a really clear roadmap of what we wanted, of where we wanted to go. And so we thought about raising money through traditional investors. We thought about it, right? Through angel investors. And it just didn't really fit with us. I mean, mainly because when you take traditional institutional capital, the expectation is that you will either sell your company or take it public. And that's a win for them. Like, that's where their sort of incentive is, or the incentive is for them. And for me personally, as a business owner, and why I got into doing this in the first place, is I actually don't want to sell the company. I want to be working on Know Your Team ideally 20 years from now. And I'm not interested in taking a company public. Just from a personal standpoint, I've never been excited about the idea of working on or running a team that's really any bigger than 100 people at most. Even then, I'm just like, oh my God, 50 people at most. And some of you may be sitting here being like, oh, Claire, well, whatever. Like, everyone has their own flavors, but just for me to know myself, I was like, that's just not what I've been about. I just want to be working on this problem for as long as I can. And so we just knew that the incentives wouldn't align there. So then I had considered Bryce Roberts, who runs Indie VC. I had met Bryce maybe 3 or 4 years ago, actually, when Indie VC first started. And he had actually tried to get me to participate and thought that it would be a really good fit. And at the time, Know Your Team, we were so young. It was like 7 months after I'd just become CEO. And I was like, I don't even know what I would use the money for. I don't even know where we're trying to go to. But now I was like, oh, no, I know exactly what we're trying to build. And on sort of their end as Indie VC, they had sort of also during that time developed more of their thesis, but it became an absolute no-brainer that they would be the only partners that we would want to work with. I mean, one is just a sense of what Bryce and their best intention is founder optionality. Like, that's what they're optimizing for. So if traditional investors are optimizing for the exit and for the return, I mean, of course, Bryce and you want to be doing that, but the way and the means to which they see doing that is founder optionality. And what I mean by that is just, if you want to raise another round, great, go do that. If you never want to raise again, great, go do that. Just giving you options as a founder and not feeling boxed in. And for me, freedom is everything. It's why I run my own business, right? It's why I work remotely. It's why, that's what I really gravitate towards. I also trusted Bryce, right? So just, having someone who's a genuinely good person is always good to do business with. And so, yeah, so we partnered with them. We raised a small 500K round. And yeah, and could not be happier. I'll say one last thing about an EDC that I actually was pleasantly surprised by is, I think for myself as a founder of sort of an unconventional company, right? Where we do things in a bit of a different way in terms, especially in the SaaS space. It was so relieving to all of a sudden get to meet other founders who are a part of that cohort and portfolio who similarly were like, oh yeah, no, I optimize for freedom and optionality. And yeah, you're not dreaming small, Claire, just because you want to build a really big business, but work on it for a really long time. Like that's, we want to do that too. And I was like, oh, cool. I'm not, I've sort of shared this analogy before, but like, I'm not like the weird kid sitting alone at the lunch table anymore. It's like, oh, okay, there are other people too.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that question.
Thank you.
Great. Next up, we have Adobe. Please also introduce yourself.
Hey, name's Adobe. I'm currently working on a tool that measures the professional performance of knowledge workers in real time. So we do that by integrating with your different software applications and then turn those into metrics that you can interact with and sort of measure and manage your performance in real time. So the question that I had for you is, sorry, I'm just getting random messages come through. The question that I had for you is, did you ever consider shutting down your company if you didn't gain a certain level of traction immediately? Or were you always going to push through no matter what? Yeah, that's my question.
That's such an interesting question because I'm going to project a little bit here, Adobe. Thank you. It's a great question, which is, I think there's a question behind the question, which is how do you know when to keep going, right? Like when do you know what is enough and what isn't? And I think there are a lot of frameworks out there for people who try to give answers on this question. But I'll give you mine, right? It's really simple. You just have to like it, honestly. I think, and that sounds so simplistic, but I think the idea of traction in many ways is sort of a construct in the sense that there is no objective level of which you have reached product market fit. I mean, for example, if you were to Google product market fit today, there are like 3 to 5 different ways that you can calculate it. And even between those, that's sort of debated. So if that's one measure of traction, so to speak, it's like, well, that's sort of arbitrarily decided. And then what people will tell you who've run massively successful businesses is they will say that also changes and they have to revisit and sort of readjust and regain product market fit every few years, if not sooner, right? So the idea that you just sort of hit traction, right? And then that's when it starts to sort of go and then you create this flywheel yeah, maybe, but also it's a construct that we create for ourselves. So rather than it being, this is the thing that's going to say whether or not I should keep doing it, is if I see this from other people, I think a big part of it is, do I like it, right? Do I like it, and is it adding some sort of value? Because I think the minute that you do start to get traction, and then, for example, you don't like it, you're not enjoying the process, it's a huge drag to actually do the work. Then that's counter to then why even keep going, right? We have the luxury of choosing. I mean, in this day and age, it's insane. We have the luxury of getting to choose what we do with our time. For us who are lucky enough to be on this call, right? What an insane, beautiful opportunity that we have to get to do that. So because of that, it's I think in my mind, that bar of what traction is, it's so you can move that up and down in so many ways, and then it changes just depending on how your business goes. That I think the deeper, I don't know, I think the question that you have to listen to a lot more closely is just how much you actually are in love with the problem, so to speak. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. I just have one more question, if that's okay.
Of course, please.
So during the early stages when you were recruiting, like what did you find would really help with, like, I guess, bringing in super talented people during the early days when things are still a bit hazy? So not necessarily the identifying talent part, but actually getting them to engage and like sort of really commit to the same level that you were willing to commit to.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. I think one is actually a reflection for yourself that you actually likely, it's very rare that you are going to ever actually find someone who will commit in the same way that you do. I don't think that should be your expectation when you go out. I think if you do, you set yourself up to be massively disappointed, and it's unfair, right? It's sort of your baby, so to speak, right? And so the fact that someone's going to be equally invested likely isn't going to happen. And so instead of pushing for that, I think a question of if you've, or rather a frame of thinking, okay, so you found this person, you're like, oh my God, if we get them on board, that would just be a game changer. But they would be leaving this big cushy salary and they're taking a big risk. Like what in the world can I offer, right? This actually happened to me just very transparently. So our CTO today, his name's Daniel Lopez, and he's brilliant. He is both a insanely brilliant technologist and CTO, but also a pure product person, extremely difficult to find. And he used to be the director of product at If This, Then That at the time. And he had mentioned to me that he was interested in the CTO role when it opened up. And I got really excited. I was like, oh my God, like I never thought like we could find someone like these people are so hard to find. It's like a unicorn. And so I'm thinking in my head, oh my God, he's going to have to take a salary cut. Like we're tiny, like no benefits. Like we don't IFT is a big consumer facing product. Like what do I have to offer? Okay. So here's what I thought about is essentially just, well, what is most important to him personally? Like what drives him and is the thing that he feels he might be actually missing in his current role. And when I was talking to him, it was really, really clear. He was working like crazy for them. It was insane hours. It was, mainly out of his own volition, to be very clear, right? But it was, he had to go into an office every day. He hadn't traveled to Brazil to see his parents in years. And it was wearing. And I was thinking, oh wow, well, we're a remote team. You can work from anywhere. Freedom and flexibility is sort of the thing I personally optimize for. And I thought, oh, that's likely, of all the things that we can't give him, that is actually one thing that we can. And so that's what I shared. So as you think about for the person, your dream candidate who you're desperately wanting to come on board, I would say, of course, you need to paint a vision, right, for what you're trying to build. Of course, you want to talk about why that person specifically and no one else is valuable. That's important. No one likes to feel like they're getting recruited to a team and you're saying the same spiel to every single person who walks in the door, right? So there's that. But I think the real key is trying to deeply understand what is it that person wants most, and in what ways can you actually deliver on that?
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Thank you.
Oh, you bet. No problem.
Next up, we have Mo, followed by Yura.
Hey, Claire. Thanks for the answer to the last question. It was awesome to hear your perspective, because recently I just onboarded a first engineer who is my friend, and your answer will definitely help us for the next hires. So my question is, actually it's two questions. First one being, was it an explicit decision to like focus on blog and on the side of the product? Because like at the early days, we're like 3 people working, and we're already short of like time on building the product. And I really want to write on the problem and like give my experience with tips and also drive people to know our like product. But I'm worried that might just be me spending time on things that don't move the needle as much. So that's my first question. Was that an explicit decision? How did you come to that decision, or it was just what you like to do? And the second one being, at the early days, have you had done like B2B sales or selling to like companies? I find it like challenging to pitch my product to like teams or book meetings with managers there's like there are multiple various ways to do it. Like give them a calendar link, or just write them an email, give free trials, like do Twitter outreach, or like wait for them to come at your blog. There are all these ways to do. And also you can just hold a bit longer and make the product, the landing page better, or you could like push through and book lots of meetings. What I'm interested in is, how did you like approach it at the early days, and have you had experience? And if you hadn't, what tips would you give like someone getting started on selling to businesses? And by the way, what we do is like communication for remote teams, talking to your team as if you're sitting together, but also with respecting the focus and the freedom of time you have.
Amazing. I have one quick follow-up question, Mohammed. Who do you see as your who on the team buys the product? Is it the CEO? Is it the head of HR? Is it an employee?
Actually, we're at the second pivot. In the first one, it was like the manager or CTO would adopt the product and onboard everyone. And I kind of found out that that's not like something I'd love to do, like booking Calendly events all day and talking to managers, convincing them. So that our latest product is like actually easy to do bottom up, like Slack. And the goal is like a few junior developers adopt it, they like it, they give it to the other people. And also we could do it like top down. And if I know a manager is a friend, I give it to them and they can try it with the team.
Yeah. Amazing questions. You're asking sort of the heart of what makes a business run, right? Acquisition. And how did we decide on our acquisition strategy? So blogging for us, I just want to give a lot of context. It works for us because of the kind of business we are and because of the kind of customer we're trying to reach, right? So one, we are targeting directly to managers. We're not selling to HR departments. We're not selling to the head of people. They sign up, no, there's no doubt, but that's not who we're selling towards. So because of that, the content strategy that we use lines up with who that target audience should be. So I think blogging really, it only works if it fits in the context of what is the sort of the way your buyer, your actual buyer, looks to make a purchase. So for us, for new managers, they are literally Googling new manager tips or best one-on-one questions or team meeting agenda. And so, to take your very specific case of, okay, a remote communication tool, and you want to try this bottoms up strategy, content marketing, there's a ton of different numbers on it, but it tends to be cheaper, right, in terms of paid. And the interesting thing with paid acquisition is you usually need to have some sort of content in order to drive the paid piece of it, right? So that's one thing to consider. On the other part of the blog piece and the content marketing piece to consider is that content marketing also only works if your content is good. That's the thing that people don't realize. It sounds like it's so obvious. And the reason I emphasize that is because some people think that, I just need to generate a lot of things or hire a bunch of people or outsource, find a bunch of, folks online and, optimize things for keywords. And then all of a sudden the traffic is going to be coming in. You might get traffic, but it's not going to be quality traffic, right? So content marketing only works if the content is quality, which means that you or someone is going to have to devote a significant amount of time in figuring out what's your voice, what's the positioning, what are the keywords you're going after, and then creating the consistency and knowing that you likely are not going to see results in terms of that traffic coming through for at least 3 to 4 months. We didn't. And so the way we made that, and so here's the other piece of of making content good is you actually have to be good at it. And what I mean by good at it is a good writer. And then also if you don't know sort of the SEO stuff, be willing to learn that really quickly. So when we started off doing the content marketing stuff, maybe we didn't really super invest in it, honestly, until maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I knew nothing about SEO. I just sort of kind of was like, it's like spammy and I don't need to know about it and whatever, I sort of had my nose in the air about it. And our CTO, Danny, he was like, no, Claire, I'm going to buy, I'm buying these books to read about it. I think you should read about it. I think we got to do this, right? I think we got to go all in on this. I think it fits with our strategy. And so like I had to learn up on that, right? And then what I realized is the content itself matter. I mean, it's just so obvious, but it's like people are not going to read the thing if it's actually not good. So whether that's you, Mohammed, whether that's you hiring folks to do this, but that's just something that you need to think about. Like there's no sort of shortcut to that, right? It's like, no, you're going to have to either carve out a ton of time and invest in it and personally get better and become an expert on it, or find other people to do it if you go in that direction. So that's on the blog side. The B2B side, so we used to, as I mentioned, Know Your Company used to actually be sold directly to CEOs, right? Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it was sort of a B2B situation. And what I would actually do is I would do a lot of actually in-person and Zoom meetings and pitch. And and that was, we also experimented a bit with cold emailing CEOs and doing that. There was one point in our history where we hired a head of business development even to do that. And I think
by the way, how the Zoom meetings and in-person meetings, how did you like source the prospects? Like, were they already friends? Were they like reaching out behind the doors?
So this was maybe for the first year or two of Know Your Company when it was called that. And a lot of it was personal network. Another big part of it was I spoke at a lot of conferences. And so, and a lot of CEO focused conferences. And so then would pitch in person, right? And then the last is obviously through the website, and you would have prospects sign up for, it would be a demo essentially, right? But we would have to vet you. You would have to be the CEO, you would have to, et cetera, right? In order to book the meeting. It is, so it didn't work for us because, in my opinion, mainly actually because of the way the product was priced. At the time, we used to price it $100 per person for your team for one time. So if you had 30 people, it would be $3,000. And the reason that doesn't work with our price is it's the amount of time for me to be doing that. It just didn't justify it, right? So we could just get so many more leads from the content side and then close them versus having
so you changed the product to like accommodate for bottom-up approach, or you just switched the approach? Okay.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, the pricing has a lot to do with why we switched to bottoms up. And then the other was, and this is I may be eating my words in a few years, we'll find out, but we felt like our product is actually best used when it's being sold directly to the manager versus directly to the HR department. And so that's why we decided not to target HR departments.
That's a great point.
That may not be true for all of it. I want to get to the heart of your question though, which is the fact that you essentially asked like, what's the best way to do it? And I think, we only have a few minutes here. And so like, in the context of trying to answer that question,
maybe you wouldn't know until you try like different approaches and like note down what do you like, what aligns more with the customer, who gets the most value, who's more excited. That's the answer, like I'm afraid of. Like you have to try a ton.
Yeah, and I think no, you're absolutely right. And I think like the best thought that I can offer is, especially because you're in this phase of trying something new, is you just run a really controlled experiment, right? Where you have a certain number of leads that you reach out to, and then you make a hypothesis of what would need to make this be worth it, in the sense of how many of those people that you initially reach out to would book meetings, and from those meetings, how many of them would actually go to a trial, and from the trial, how many of them would actually convert. And what's your hypothesis for this would need to, like, I'm going to be spending this amount of time doing that, of your time, right? Calculate what the cost of acquisition would be for your time to do that. Look at what the LTV is for your actual product and say, okay, based off this means if I have 50 people I'm emailing, then it's this number of meetings, right? And then actually do the experiment and then compare the numbers.
I think that would actually rule out the emotional burden, or make it easier emotionally when you're like in the context of an experiment, rather than like, every no is like helping you decide better for the future, and not like you're building a bad thing. I like the experiments approach. I'll do that.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. It also sounds like you might not like it, right? Which is okay, right? I think one thing that is really hard for us as founders when we are deciding a strategy to take is we often go, oh, I don't think I should do that. And the answer is because I don't really like doing that, okay? I think to sort of circumvent for that bias is just say, no, I don't like doing it. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but we should try it. And if it actually kind of works or it shows that it's worth pursuing, then you can always find someone else to do it. But don't
it's just an experiment at the moment.
Right. You're not tying yourself to having to run B2B sales for the rest of your time in running this, right? You know, I think, and this is just from personal experience. I mean, I told you that I didn't want to think about SEO because I didn't like it, right? And look at what it's done for us now. And so just know, like, I don't like it, but that doesn't mean we should close it off.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Claire, you've been so generous with your time. If you have, I think there's one actually excellent sort of wrap up last question, but if you have to hop off, we totally understand.
No. I'm here for you guys.
Excellent. I'm asking this on behalf of Yura. So what do you think is advice that generally applies to managers, but that managers at a startup of just 2, 3, 4, 5 people, maybe that advice does not apply to them? Something that they might do wrong quite often.
Oh, that's a great question.
Or maybe all advice does apply at that phase.
Well, no. So I think the biggest thing that managers typically don't think about in general, and I think it applies the most for sort of early stage startups and early stage managers, is they don't realize that every action that you take, every decision that you make, every choice in how you communicate literally creates a pattern for what will then expand. Like, we don't realize as managers, especially when it's just one of us or two of us, that we are literally modeling out what the team will eventually be. So for example, if we right now, let's say, you're running your team and you feel like you don't really have time to share what you're working on with your co-founder because it's just the two of you and you're just sitting next to each other. Just think about the fact of, okay, wow, well, what's going to happen to our institutional history and knowledge of all these experiments that we're running and all this data that we have right now? It's just been between our heads, right? And a lot of managers, it's almost like they call it like the illusion of transparency, this idea that it's really clear to you, but you're not extracting that. And so, I guess one thought I might offer for each of you is, and you don't need to over-index on it, but I don't think it ever hurts to really lean into it, is to be extremely intentional about the fact of how you are conducting yourself in your 1, 2, 3, 5, 10-person team. That is a unit of modeling for when new folks join. And so how are you setting those patterns well today?
It's a great answer.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Claire, for going over and for answering all of those questions so thoughtfully.
Oh, no, thank you all so much. Like I said, I'm so encouraged that everyone is working on such ambitious and important projects, and excited to see what you all come up with. So thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire.
Bye.